So this week I wanted to show how I make ultra-realistic but also very playable tree terrain for my games, including several options for durability and speed of crafting. Welcome to the archive, my name's Matt. These trees are designed to be removable from the tiles that I use them on, giving me freestanding trees without the kind of scatter terrain bases that I'm not very fond of. This allows you to place trees on forest, grassland, or even sloped terrain very easily, something traditional trees find rather difficult. The connection points in the middle allow you to use them as either a tall forest or city tree that's grown without low branches to reach the light or has been trimmed for the inhabitants' convenience. Or it can show a wider grassland or village tree, which grows out wider at a lower height. They let you replace the top as well to show different seasons or even a dead or winter forest. These connections are magnetized. But you can easily do them with barbecue skewers too, it's just a little bit less subtle. There's much more I like about this system, both for playability and for storage, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Getting started, I had a few options, and you can use whichever you prefer with this system, it should work with all three. I could go with twisting wires into a gnarled, realistic looking shape. I do really love this technique, but it's very time consuming and not great for filling a forest, which is my goal here. There's always the use a nice stick option, but this often runs into the flaw of finding enough of the right shaped sticks, unless you buy them. And then of course there's the old favourite, Woodland Scenics armatures, but these have other flaws. Namely, they're designed for railways, and while they kinda work at 28mm, they feel a little bit too small. That, and they all look exactly the friggin' same. So I decided to mix things up a bit. Realistically, the armatures were going to be the fastest and least frustrating option, especially for beginners, because they give you a rough tree shape to follow rather than a blank knot of wires. But I wanted to make these varied in height and shape far more than the armature would allow. So donning my best maniacal mad scientist persona, I spliced several armatures together, hacking them down to fit, bending them to look nice and interesting, after soaking them in hot water first so they'd bend easier, and pinning them into place by drilling a hole and supergluing 1mm steel wire in there to support them. The wire is basically paper clips, but buying it as wire is cheaper. There's links in my equipment list in the description. The key to getting a nice look to this is twisting the pieces to have some in each direction that they could reach the sun in, spreading each branch in multiple directions from there, and making sure every single branch has a wibble along it. By making these wibbles, you make it look like the branch grew in multiple directions over time seeking the sun, rather than just growing in a single direction rather fast. This is far more important when making the leafless winter/dead trees that I show later. Ones that are going to have foliage, you're not going to be able to see most of this for, and you're going to trim most of these branches off anyway. As a general rule, to make larger trees like this, I combined two 6 or 7 inch trees at the bottom, bending the trunks out in the middle so they split, and added a 3 to 4 inch tree on top of each one, with its trunk cut off at the bottom. To make these mid-sized trees, I basically stacked one of these 4 to 5 inch trees on top of the other, with the trunk and tip cut off again. I also trimmed off a lot of these extra end branches for trees that were going to have foliage. You only really need 1 or 2 at the most on each branch, but twisting out branches make the dead trees look a lot more interesting. This will also leave you with a bunch of these left over. If you like the channel, put them in a box somewhere instead of throwing them out. I may have plans for them. Eventually. I also took the opportunity to add some modular height to various trees using trunks. You can cut these from balsa wood dowel and trim them down with a knife until they're the shape that you want, which is a lot faster than the method that I used for most of mine. I made them slightly wider at the bottom to give that illusion of growth. You can get a really nice bark texture from balsa wood. Unfortunately, then it won't blend into the tree. Then you just need to drill a magnet hole in the center of the top and bottom, and add some facing north side up with superglue. To match these, I added north side up magnets to the bottom of the trees too, and hid them. Later. I had thought that balsa dowel wouldn't be durable enough for this, but once I got out of lockdown and to a hobby shop and managed to pick some up, yeah, they're plenty durable for this. With that done, I used some milliput to smooth over the ugly side effects of my arboreal splicing, blend the trunks with the trees and hide the magnets, though you could use other materials like air dry clay or modelling compound for this. Any type of milliput will pretty much do for this, though you'll want to keep your hands a little bit damp when handling it just to stop it sticking. Doing it with a more durable putty like this not only makes it more hard wearing for later use, it also means that you'll end up with these little lumps and bumps in it, which are a little bit less likely to happen when sculpting with something softer like clay. I also used twigs and hot glue to add bulk where needed. This is also the much longer method that I used for most of my trunks because I couldn't get balsa wood fast enough in lockdown. To add some nice wood grain, I used one of these soft sculpting tools, which I can highly recommend as something to make you feel instantly better at sculpting. They make it a lot easier to get smooth, natural looking results than with a harder edged tool. Well, I've found anyway. All I did with it was keep it damp, but not dripping, and draw short lines at slight angles, generally keeping the tool fairly flat so I got a wider, more natural finish rather than a sharp line that looks more like a knife cut with smooth raised edges. This is absolutely optional, especially higher up. I'll be adding more texture in a minute, which will hide any rough work at this stage and leave only vague shapes, so it's a really good opportunity to get out of your comfort zone without too much consequence. It can be a good idea to give Milliput a minute or two to harden up a little bit before sculpting it if it's fresh from a new pack. It can be a little bit soft otherwise. This is actually kind of great if you're nervous because it gives you plenty of time to get the Milliput smoothed on before sculpting it. Another great thing about Milliput is that it's really easy to get rid of some mistakes just by carving it away afterwards, either with an X-Acto knife, some sandpaper, even a fingernail. To make sure all the trees would fit their trunks, I first did the putty around the bottom of a small tree and a wide tree, and then used that as a guide when adding putty to the top of each size of trunk, depending on the option that you choose, and used the trunks as a guide for the bottom putty of the rest of the trees. I'm not totally happy with how these trunks ended up. I feel like I could have done better. I rushed through them a little bit because the experimentation took longer than I wanted it to. I would have liked to add some knots to the wood, maybe some random branches here and there, and little holes for small animals to hide in, that kind of thing. These would have been really easy to add too, just with some small sticks and some sculpting. Finally, I added some detailed texture to blend the materials and get rid of that smooth, plasticky feel a lot of miniature trees seem to end up with. I added it by painting on a thin layer of thick PVA where I wanted it, and then dusted on a full layer of baking soda using a hairspray lid with the strip cut from some tights to keep the layer smooth. I brushed on the PVA here a few branches at a time rather than watering it down and just spraying it, which you might think would be easier. The reason I did this was quite simple. Science! As most of you clever people are no doubt aware, baking soda dissolves in water, and when it dries up again, it forms into larger crystals? Whatever they're called. Larger individual grains than you get with the baking soda naturally. And this effect is worse the more watery the glue. To seal it in place, I just gave it a spray with non-water-based varnish. Once that was done, it becomes very durable and hard-wearing. And that's it. Now this tree can attach to its trunk or be used separately as a wider, shorter tree. What I really like about this system is that it lets you remove the foliage of individual trees when they get in the way of view or play, leaving the trunk behind, which allows you to still use it as terrain in combat. It's still there, and you can make use of it to guard your flank or hide behind, or even climb using some special functionality that I built into my dead winter tree tops to represent the tree without its foliage. Or just place the model securely on the trunk itself. This allows you to really vary the height of trees in your forest with ease, as well as adding yet more variety between them and making the area more playable. It also allows you to make even more dense forests for interesting combats, just by not using the treetops in the combat area. I also have some plans to add some accessories to this system like tree platforms, but I'll get to that in a later video. Oh, and it lets you store the trees more easily and securely by breaking up the height. A simple steel tin can lid makes the perfect storage base for these. I put mine in my custom storage boxes, so I can even stack them on shelves. There's a link on how to make these really easily in the description. That said, if you prefer scatter terrain trees, you can make trees in this style and just put a base on it. It's all down to your own preferences in the end anyway. Now, here's a nice gallery of the finished trees while I thank my amazing patrons, without whom these videos would not be possible. That support is absolutely vital. Without enough patrons, I quite simply couldn't afford to continue. So thank you so much to everyone who helps keep the channel alive. And because I like to say thank you for all this support, there's also a bunch of benefits, including bonus videos, live streams, templates, printables, and polls on what exactly I make next. So if any of that sounds good, please check it out. So that's our forest skeleton. Now for the meat. Or veg, I guess? Ahem. Sorry. Bad jokes aside, you have a lot of options here, but in my personal opinion, crafter's preference, each to their own, None of them match seafoam for realism, and there is a way to make it durable. Oh, and it is available in the US. I've seen some people worry about this, so I've put some links in the equipment list for you guys over in the States. You can definitely get access to it. Durability I'll get to in a minute. The very first thing you want to do with a box of seafoam, if you're going to mess with it, is rehydrate it by spraying it with some water, which is something you'll want to do again to each piece once you've taken it out, so it's been wet all over. This allows the pieces to bend. They're still fairly weak, but not as brittle as they are when dry. Once I had that, I broke the seafoam up into branch shapes, tearing each seafoam tree into branch-sized pieces, with a little stem at the back to hold them by, and removing these little leaves with some tweezers. Onto durability though. The key with making seafoam durable is liquid latex rubber. You can pick this up on Amazon easily, and there are links in the equipment list in the description. But basically this stuff can give the seafoam a thin but very elastic and durable coating, which means even if the branch were to snap, it wouldn't fall off, and probably wouldn't even change position much. To get a nice finish, I did this branch by branch and left them to dry on some newspaper. The latex will stick to this, but only very slightly, and it should peel off easily. It is, however, sticky as hell at this point, so resist the urge to test its durability until after you've primered it. Resist? I got this idea from Luke over at Geek Gaming Scenics, and his video linked in the description. He just dunks an entire tree, but he uses the seafoam very densely. I wanted a more open, detailed look to each one. Doing it as a whole tree is both faster and more durable though, so if those two are priorities for you, give it a try. To dunk my branches, I poured out a small amount at a time in a small disposable cup and just dunked my branches in, using an airbrush to blow away the excess down the branch, which avoids it blobbing on the smaller ends. You could easily just use a straw and good old-fashioned human blowing to do the same thing. Just be careful not to get lightheaded. With just one layer of latex, it's plenty tough, but if you're paranoid or if it's going to be used in a club environment where it might see a little bit less considerate use, you can do this step multiple times. Or just do what I said earlier and dunk a whole tree. Or both and build a latex club. Either way, once the branches are latexed up, you can attach them to the armature. Like I showed earlier, I trimmed away a lot of the smaller branches at the ends, because these are now represented by the seafoam. I also trimmed off the excess at the back of the branches that I was holding them by, because it's really not needed to attach them. Gluing it on was actually really simple. I just held the piece so that the branch was pointed to the ground, added a thin layer of liquid superglue to the end, and touched the branch to it for a few seconds. This makes sure any excess glue drips off onto whatever you're using to protect your desk, not your fingers. The latex, varnish, or something about the mix seems to let the superglue dry quite quickly, so you don't need to hold it in place for long before it's rock solid and you can just move on to the next branch. As a fairly optional last stage, you can hide the connection between the seafoam and the armature branches just by using some more latex and dabbing it on with a cocktail stick. Absolutely optional, it's mostly going to be hidden. I didn't bother doing it. Now the dead/winter trees I approached slightly differently. I wanted them to be easy to see past and reach past to make them playable. So I forewent the seafoam on these, still twisting them into similar shapes, but this time making sure some branches would be perfectly spaced for humanoid-sized models to stand on. On these branches, I added some strips of steel wire with superglue and covered them slightly in a thin layer of latex, just enough to disguise them and make them unlikely to chip paint, keeping the top layer deliberately thin for easy connection. This would allow me to add magnets to the bottom of my hollow-based minis, which I already glued tin to for uses like this, and place them in trees pretty much wherever I want. Perfect for ambushes or fleeing from wargs.
Brave Sir Robin ran away. No! Bravely ran away. I didn't!
Most of the time I'm not going to need a full forest of these, but they're a lot more easy to store and durable than the foliage versions, so I'll probably expand them into a full forest at some point so I can show creepy haunted woods using the same trunks. Finally, to paint it, I sprayed the whole thing with cheap light grey car primer to give the paint adhesion. I then gave it a full coat with the only mixture that I managed to create that, in my eyes, matches the realistic colour of common European deciduous trees like
oak, chestnut, ash, good, many have come.
I tried mixing a ton of different colours for this, but in the end a simple 2-to-1 mix of GW Mechanicus Standard Grey and Steel Legion Drab gave the result that I was looking for. While you can achieve this obviously with other paint ranges, this was the only way I found to mix it that was both easy, not obnoxiously complex, and also airbrushed quite well, giving good coverage because they're both from GW's base range, which are designed for base coats. Which is annoying because GW paint is more expensive, but in this case I think it was the right choice for me. If you do know of a spray primer in this exact colour, please let me know. It's really quite hard to find. They're usually too brown or too grey. It's hard to find that perfect balance. If you don't have an airbrush for this section, unfortunately your paint colours are going to be more limited to what sprays you can find. This is just one of the reasons that I would highly recommend getting one. I then added some darkness around the base of the trunk, splits in the branches or the undersides of the branches, basically where the tree was more likely to retain water and have darker bark or shadows. I did this using a 1-to-1 mix of carbon black and raw umber ink very gently through an airbrush. You can use a wash for this instead, but this is just another place where using an airbrush is much easier and smoother and just gets you a more natural feeling result. I've honestly really been enjoying using the airbrush for both minis and terrain recently. I can honestly heartfelt recommend one to anybody who wants to paint faster and better at the same time with pretty much no extra effort. I've linked the stuff I use in the equipment list along with some guides. No sponsorship or anything like that, but the links are Amazon affiliates, so they do help out the channel a bit if you pick one up. Using the inks makes the colour fade darker and brighter in areas quite naturally. I really like the effect and think it relates well to the appearance of real trees. Honestly, I think there's a lot more I could do with it if I practiced. I also added some flock moss to some trunks by applying watered down PVA and then blowing burnt grass fine flock onto it to get a thin, scattered, smooth layer. It's much easier to keep it thin and smooth this way compared to applying it with a brush. Finally, I added some leaves and foliage, which was probably the easiest bit. I sprayed the branch ends carefully a few times with cheap car lacquer. Basically pick the cheapest spray varnish you can find and use it in a ventilated area. I then grabbed a handful of medium green coarse flock and dabbed it to the areas that I wanted covered to give some structure to the foliage, flicking it to make sure that there were still gaps between the branches. I also used a brush to knock away any flock that got caught on branches or on the trunk where I didn't want it, before spraying it again from below and adding some dark green leaf cover over that to the undersides to add some shadowed leaves. I used a sieve to apply this to get a nice even spread. I then sprayed again from above and the sides, this time adding a 2-to-1 mix of dark green and medium green leaf cover. Mainly because I was running out of medium green. If I had access to a whole batch of that, I'd probably just do the whole top side in that instead. Finally, I sprayed the result a few times with some Mod Podge sealant. To fix these down, I just added a 6mm magnet to the surface of any tile that I wanted the option of using them on. You can use a piece of tin can lid to keep the magnet flush with the surface of the tile while the glue cools. Hot glue doesn't stick to tin very well. Then I just glued a thin layer of my grout and dirt mix over that. The funny part is there's something magnetic about this grout mix, which means you'll get a blob of it attracted to the top like this if you throw too much on. But you can get rid of that really easily with a makeup brush once the glue is dry. This works extremely well on grassland tiles or hills, because you can just leave a patch of dirt that's mostly hidden by grass anyway, and the grass also helps hide the bottom of the tree where it connects to the ground. You can even use this technique on the hill tiles that I showed recently, just pick one of the flatter bumps. It's even quite easy to add it to a piece after it's finished. Just carefully pluck up the grass in those areas first to make sure you have the open space, then add the magnet, and then add the grout on top. Easy. And that's it. Durable, realistic, playable trees that can be climbed, cleared, and fought around, all while being placeable wherever you would like to put them, nice and securely. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share, and until next time, I'll be in the archive.